Living on a dusty lunar colony where the only stars you see are through a dome and your biggest adventure is selling veggies at the local market. That was Cella Milner's life until one day, everything changed. Cella, 29, had never left the lunar colonies. Her world was her family's hydroponics farm, a small patch of green on the outskirts of Nova, Georgia. She knew every inch of it, the creaking porch, the stubborn soil, the artificial sunsets that painted the dome gold. But sometimes late at night, when the stars stretched endlessly beyond the colony, she'd lie awake, dreaming of oceans she couldn't see across, mountains that stole your breath, and planets where the horizons never ended. Those dreams felt like another galaxy entirely. Then, one morning, a holographic envelope arrived on her ancient comms terminal. It was from Amara Clark, her old academy roommate and one of the few friends who'd stayed in touch after Cella returned home to run the farm. Amara was getting married on New Seattle, and inside the envelope was a surprise, a Spaceliner ticket, purchased with Amara's frequent jumper miles. "I won't take no for an answer," Amara had written. "You're coming, Cella. You deserve a little adventure." Cella stared at the ticket, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a trip. It was a doorway to a world she'd only imagined, but it came with challenges. She'd have to find someone to watch the farm, scrape together credits for a decent outfit, and figure out how spaceports even worked. Still, beneath the nerves, a spark of excitement ignited. Maybe it was time. 2 weeks later, Cella stood at the regional spaceport, clutching her boarding pass like a lifeline. She wore her best synthetic jeans, a clean polymer flannel shirt, and her worn leather boots, polished until they shone. Everything felt foreign. The crowds, the mechanical voices crackling over loudspeakers, the blinking holoboards full of codes and times. She settled into a plastile chair by the viewport, watching spacecraft taxi across the launch pad, feeling both out of place and oddly alive. "Excuse me, miss, is this seat taken?" A voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up into the scaled face of an elderly dragon, leaning heavily on a cane. His right hind leg was stiff, barely bending as he eased himself down. His claws, gripping the cane, bore deep scars, burn wounds, long healed but never forgotten. Patches of his once gleaming scales were darkened, with veins of angry orange glowing beneath, the telltale signs of a dragon caught in plasma fire. A battered galactic defense fleet cap was pulled low over his horned brow, its faded fabric embroidered with an emblem Cella didn't recognize. "No, not at all," she said, moving her bag aside. He nodded in thanks, but said nothing more. As he settled into his seat, Cella noticed how people around them shifted subtly away, giving him wide berth. Some stole quick glances at his injuries. Others avoided looking at him entirely. It was the same silence she'd seen in her father's final years, when lunar dust disease had left him frail and sunken. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Cella offered a small smile. After a long moment, the dragon returned it, the corners of his mouth tugging upward beneath the shadow of his cap. A small lick of flame briefly escaped between his teeth. The boarding call crackled over the loudspeaker. "Flight Nebula 23 to New Seattle, now boarding." Cella rose, smoothing her jeans, her ticket projecting Group 3. But as she moved toward the gate, an airline staffer flagged her down. "Miss Milner, congratulations! You've been selected for a complimentary upgrade to first class today." Cella blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" The woman smiled. "Positive. Enjoy your flight." It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life, if only for a few hours. As she handed over her ticket, she glanced back at the dragon, who was struggling to hoist his battered duffel bag onto his good shoulder. He was heading for the back of the ship. Coach, middle seat, for 14 hours to New Seattle. "Excuse me," she called softly, weaving her way back through the line toward him. "Sir, would you like to trade seats with me?" The dragon looked up, startled. His inner fire flickered visibly through the cracks in his scales. I couldn't." "Please," Cella insisted, holding out her boarding pass. "You deserve a little comfort." The surrounding crowd shifted, some watching openly now. The dragon stared at her for a long beat. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, pride wrestled down by exhaustion. He took the ticket with a trembling claw. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with something more than age, a small puff of smoke escaping with his words. Cella just smiled. "Have a good flight, sir." As he shuffled toward the first-class cabin, Cella retrieved his old economy seat, her heart strangely lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know it then, but this small act of kindness would change everything. The flight was long, 14 hours in a narrow economy seat, surrounded by the smells of engine plasma and recycled oxygen. The Arcturian next to her snored loudly through all four of his mouths. The young Kepleran across the aisle dropped his hollow tablet every few minutes, each crash making Cella jump. The food was forgettable, the synthetic coffee bitter, and every trip to the cramped waste recycler felt like a minor expedition. Yet through it all, Cella found herself strangely buoyant. She thought about the dragon in first class, about the weight he must carry, literal and invisible, and how such a small act had carved a bright moment out of an otherwise ordinary day. Toward the middle of the flight, she stretched her legs by walking toward the back of the ship. As she passed the first-class curtain, she saw him again. He wasn't sleeping like most of the other passengers. Instead, he stared thoughtfully out the viewport, his posture a little less guarded now, his shoulders more relaxed. Their eyes met for the briefest second. He gave her a nod, not of thanks this time, but something deeper. Recognition, respect. Cella nodded back and moved along. When the space liner touched down on New Seattle, it was late evening. The spaceport buzzed with exhaustion and relief as passengers pushed past each other to reach baggage claim. Cella never saw the dragon again in the blur of arriving relatives, luggage carousels, and the unfamiliar sprawl of a massive spaceport. He simply disappeared. She thought fleetingly that she should have asked his name, should have done more, but some moments, she realized, weren't meant to be stretched or dissected. Some were perfect precisely because they ended before they became complicated. Amara's wedding was everything Cella had hoped for and nothing she could have expected. Set in a cozy terraform vineyard tucked in the hills outside the city, the ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Cella laughed and danced, clinking glasses with strangers who welcomed her like family. For once, she allowed herself to be fully present, to breathe in the scent of fresh-cut alien flowers, to feel the cool evening breeze tugging at her borrowed dress, to taste the sweetness of a life lived beyond the farm's edges. When she boarded her flight back home a week later, economy class and stiff-legged again, Cella didn't mind at all. The trip had been more than worth it. Life slipped back into its familiar rhythm once she returned. Morning chores, farmers' market stalls, endless lists of things to fix or patch or mend. The memory of the flight, of the burned dragon and the seat she'd given up, became one more bright thread woven into the quiet fabric of her days. She didn't expect anything more from it. She had already received her reward, the simple joy of doing the right thing without expecting applause. Which was why when she woke one blustery Saturday morning to the sound of engines rumbling down her dirt road, Cella thought at first it must be the neighbor's teenage centurions joyriding. She tossed on a jacket and headed for the porch, grumbling good-naturedly about kids and their hover bikes. But when she stepped outside, her breath caught. It wasn't hover bikes, it was a convoy. 3 gleaming silver military cruisers rumbled to a halt at the end of her drive. Beings in crisp galactic defense fleet uniforms spilled out, their boots crunching against the gravel. A black diplomatic shuttle with government insignia idled behind them, dust swirling around its anti-grav thrusters. And at the head of it all, stepping carefully out of the front cruiser, was the dragon she thought she'd never see again. Drake Carver, only now he wasn't the anonymous battered passenger she'd offered a seat to. Now he stood tall and straight in a full-dress uniform, gleaming medals pinned to his chest, a slight limp still betraying the injuries he'd carried home from distant battlefields. The cracks in his scales still glowed with inner fire, but they looked somehow dignified now. Battle scars worn with pride. He smiled when he saw her, a slow, genuine smile that melted years from his scarred face. A tiny flame danced between his teeth. Cella's heart pounded in her ears as she stumbled down the porch steps, confusion and awe battling for space in her chest. She had no words, but somehow she knew everything was about to change again. "Miss Milner," he said, his voice steady but warm, "it's good to see you again." Cella opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She simply stared, still stunned by the sight of military cruisers lining her dirt driveway and soldiers standing at attention like some surreal honor guard. Drake's smile deepened, a tendril of flame curling from the corner of his mouth. "You look just as surprised as I was," he added, a quiet chuckle hidden in his voice. Finally, Cella found her footing. I don't understand what's going on. Drake stepped back and gestured toward the diplomatic shuttle. A being in a dark suit, neural link visible under close-cropped fur, approached with the crispness of military precision. He handed Cella a thick envelope and offered a respectful nod before retreating. Cella turned the envelope over in her hands. Her name was inscribed across the front in careful script. Miss Cella Milner. Inside was a single sheet of paper, heavy and official-looking, bearing the gold crest of the Galactic Defense Fleet at the top. Certificate of recognition for an act of extraordinary kindness and humanity toward a veteran of the Galactic Defense Fleet. The High Command extends its deepest gratitude to Miss Cella Milner. Her actions embody the spirit of compassion, respect, and dignity that every soldier fights to protect. Presented by General Drake Carver, 3rd Draconian Special Forces Brigade. Cella blinked, reading the words once, then twice. General. He wasn't just any veteran. He wasn't just a dragon she'd helped on a space liner. Drake Carver, General Carver, had been part of the Defense Fleet's most elite units. She looked up, speechless, meeting his fiery gaze. He lifted a scaled hand almost sheepishly. "You didn't know who I was," he said, "and that's exactly why it meant so much." Behind him, a few of the soldiers were unloading something large from the back of one of the cruisers. Cella could hear the clink of metal and the dull thud of heavy equipment hitting the ground. What are they doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake's smile was almost mischievous now, smoke curling from his nostrils. "We brought you something. A few things, actually." Cella watched, stammering, as 2 soldiers carefully carried a large storage unit toward her porch. Another group was setting up what looked suspiciously like construction materials, planks of terraforming wood, atmosphere regulation wire, heavy tools. "What is this?" she asked again, more firmly this time. Drake turned fully toward her, his posture straight, almost ceremonial, wings folded neatly behind him. "You gave me comfort and dignity when you had no reason to," he said simply. "You gave up something precious, a seat that could have made your journey easier, just to make mine bearable." Cella shook her head. "It was just a seat." "It wasn't," Drake said, his voice gentle but insistent, a small flame punctuating his words. "Not to me." He stepped closer again, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I was coming back from a treatment program on New Seattle. Burn recovery, surgery after surgery from a mission gone wrong. Most days I felt like I wasn't even a dragon anymore, just a set of scars that people wanted to forget. Your act reminded me that there are still beings who see beyond the uniform, beyond the injuries." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cold, artificial breeze bit at Cella's cheeks. A native crater raven called in the distance. Finally, Drake continued, his tone shifting to something brighter, his inner fire glowing more intensely. "So we thought it was only fair to repay a little of that kindness." He pointed to the crates and the materials. "We're going to rebuild your atmospheric regulators." Cella's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Drake nodded. "One of the dragons in my unit runs a terraforming company now. When I told the team what you did, they volunteered, took leave, flew in on their own time. They wanted to do this, not just for me, for you." Cella looked at the farm's old atmospheric dome, her father's old pride, now half collapsed after a micrometeor shower last spring. She tried patch by patch to keep it standing, but it was beyond her skills and budget. "You don't have to," she began, her voice cracking. Drake's expression softened, a gentle puff of smoke escaping his nostrils. "We want to." The day turned into a blur of motion. Soldiers and dragons worked with the efficiency and camaraderie that came from years of relying on each other. Cella barely had time to process it all, watching as they measured, cut, hammered, and repaired. Some set up fresh oxygen recyclers around her livestock pen. Others replaced sagging beams and reinforced the atmosphere shields. They laughed and traded jokes as they worked, filling the farm with a lively energy Cella hadn't felt since before her parents passed. At one point, as she carried out nutrient-enriched lemonade for the crew, she found herself standing beside Drake, watching his team work. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. He looked at her, a glint of humor in his fiery eyes. You didn't have to give up your seat. Cella smiled, her throat tight with emotion. Fair enough. They stood there for a long moment, two beings who had crossed each other's paths by pure chance, and whose lives had been quietly, irrevocably changed because of it. As the artificial sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the fields, Drake turned to her one last time. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his uniform jacket. He pulled out a small weathered coin, its surface gleaming with an inner light that matched his own. This is a challenge coin, he explained, pressing it into her hand. It's something we pass between soldiers to recognize acts of valor, loyalty, or brotherhood. Cella turned the coin over. On one side was the emblem of the 3rd Draconian Special Forces Brigade. On the other, a simple phrase, deeds not words. It's not given lightly, Drake said, his voice solemn, and it's rarely given to civilians. Cella blinked rapidly against the sting in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Drake smiled, a small flame dancing between his teeth. You already said it, he replied, when you saw me. And just like that, Cella realized kindness wasn't a small thing. It was everything. It built bridges without asking for tolls. It planted seeds in hearts, even ones that had nearly forgotten how to grow. And sometimes, just sometimes, it brought a convoy of dragons to your door. As the convoy pulled away just before the artificial sunset, the rumble of engines fading into the soft chorus of atmosphere regulators, Cella stood at the edge of the driveway, the challenge coin still clutched in her hand. She waved until the last cruiser disappeared beyond the crater rim. For a long time, she simply stood there, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She wasn't sure she had fully processed any of it. All she knew was that her universe was bigger now and brighter. That night, as she lay in bed, the windows open to the cool artificial breeze, Cella looked out at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, a dragon she barely knew, and yet somehow knew deeply, was carrying her kindness forward. And she would keep planting seeds in the earth, in the hearts of strangers, and in the quiet, stubborn hope that a single act of compassion could still, even now, move the galaxy.